Hi, my name is Ken Houston. Today we're going to look at conflict, what makes a conflict, and the process of conflict resolution, with an example from Northern Ireland. Conflict affects everyone's lives at different levels. There are several key elements to any conflict. There are actors, that's the people involved. There are issues, that's what the conflict is about. There is a context, which is where it takes place. And there are dynamics, that's what drives the conflict. Each of these elements can be broken up into other aspects. We can consider, for example, whether an actor is a first, second, or third level actor. We can also look at leadership. We can look at things like, for example, power, relative power between actors. Under issues can, for example, be values, resources, or fact-based. Context can refer to lots of different things. There's obviously the geographic boundaries or location. There's also institutional. There are also things, for example, like history, what's gone before. Under dynamics, we could think about things like trigger events, stereotyping, and other things, aspiration levels. In any human conflict, whether at the interpersonal or at the interstate level, facts like these and components like these are aspects of conflict. And understanding a conflict means delving into each of these aspects. Okay, so any conflict follows a fairly predictable pattern. It's known as the conflict curve, and it basically looks like this. Conflict is latent at the beginning, and then when a trigger event occurs, it begins to escalate. And as it goes up in intensity and frequency through things like spiraling and retaliation, it eventually reaches the point known as the hurting stalemate. That is the point when both actors or the actors concerned realize that continuing the conflict is more costly than pursuing a victory. At this point then, conflict begins to de-escalate. And eventually we reach the post-conflict peace-building phase. In reality, of course, the conflict curve is never followed. It is much more haphazard and fragmented. So, for example, in the Northern Ireland conflict, which is known as the Troubles, there was a latent conflict over a prolonged period of time. This conflict emerged into consciousness in the late 1960s with the civil rights movement. And then there were a number of trigger events which precipitated violent responses, and the conflict escalated and went on for almost 35 years, until eventually both sides realized that there was no military solution to the conflict. And eventually a process of peace building and peacemaking began. That took a long time. It was not easy. There were many setbacks, but eventually the conflict de-escalated and it went into the post-conflict phase, and there was an agreement signed in 1998 to restore power sharing to Northern Ireland.